All right, we're going to wing this one. So today in this video, we're going to be going through Brewmaster Season 1 guide. I'm going to cover everything from stats to gear, talents. I'm going to talk a little bit more about like Apex talents specifically, because I think players who are looking to level or who have leveled will probably notice a pretty big rotational shift with the Apex talents. They're very impactful, so I want to highlight those. I'm also going to talk about a generalized rotation, and then we'll finish up with like an FAQ, so questions that I've been getting on stream or on my YouTube channel over the last couple weeks about Brewmaster. Now, two things I want to mention. This video is going to assume that you have a decent understanding about Brewmaster, and I'm going to talk through some of like the basics. Some of it might be for good or for new players. Some of it might be for more experienced players. Now, I do plan on actually redoing my Masterclass series. I did one in the War Within Season 3, thinking that, hey, Brewmaster just got significantly reworked. There's no way they're going to rework it again going into Midnight. And lo and behold, they did a massive overhaul of Brewmaster once again. And so most of that information is probably outdated at this point. And so I do plan on doing a Masterclass that should release on my Patreon. So if you're a supporter of my Patreon, you can go check that out. It will be available on YouTube near the start of the season, but I'm going to make it, it's going to go live a couple days early on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, check it out. If not, it is going to be available on YouTube for everyone before the season. The second thing I want to mention is just like massive disclaimer. This video is going to be based around my testing, and I'm generally a Mythic Plus player, so it's going to be a little bit more Mythic Plus focused. I'll talk about some raid aspects, but I'm not going to go in detail. If you're looking for like raid information and builds, I do recommend checking out WoWhead's guide written by Sinzhu. Excellent guide writer. That's normally where I default to when I'm looking at this kind of information, when I'm looking up either like new tanks or Brewmaster information specifically. So take everything that I say with like a grain of salt. And, you know, I recommend using additional sources, not just me, because my experience has differed from other players, and I'm not someone who spends a lot of time looking at sims. Anyways, I know that was a long intro, so let's just kind of dive into it. And so let's start off with stats, because I think it's kind of the core foundation of what Brewmaster is, because stats have a large impact on how we play and how the class performs. So in a new expansion, and this, I mean, this also happens for like every new season, but generally main stat is always going to be your primary focus. So even if a piece of gear has bad stats, like let's say when we start getting into Mythic 0 farms, early Mythic Plus, early raid season, anything that has a higher item level will be king. Even if it has like haste and mastery on it, it'll still be probably a sizable upgrade just simply because of the main stat increase. Now, when you get later into the season and you start optimizing your gear, or you have two equal pieces, let's say you got 2 rings to drop from M0s, or I guess maybe like a neck is probably a better example. If you have a neck with crit verse versus haste mastery, you're going to wear the crit verse one. And so this season is weird, and with all the changes, stat weights haven't really changed at all. If anything, haste feels much worse than it used to. Haste has always been a bad stat for us, but basically crit, verse, or mastery are pretty much equal. Now, I personally like to lean towards critical strike and versatility because I think it has a more of a defensive impact on how the Brewmaster performs, but mastery is a fine offensive stat as well. So as you begin gearing, you're probably going to want to focus on any of those 3 stats, with personally crit and verse being the primary. So understanding stats is really important for our gearing choices. And so I'm going to have this linked down below, but I have put together what I would consider my wish list for Season 1. Now, this is going to differ a little bit than the WoWhead guide, which I will also link down below for people who are interested in checking that out as well. Now, when I do my wish lists, I like to focus on people who just do Mythic Plus, because I know not everyone is able to raid, because it's quite a commitment. Plus, there's a lot of RNG involved. If you do end up having the time to pug, the chance you're going to get your loot to drop and you're going to win a roll is a lot smaller than if you're raiding in a coordinated guild like myself, who will assign gear based on, you know, a multitude of different factors. And so I'm going to leave this down below. I'm sorry for the flash grenade. So this is also in my Discord, and here is the list. And so I didn't put as much work into it. I didn't add a lot of drop downs here. I just kind of put in what I think is best. You're also going to see the stat priority here. It's going to be your main set is going to be always your focus, followed by crit equals verse. I think it's a little bit better than mastery in a vacuum. It depends on what you're going for. If you're going for more damage, mastery might become a little bit better than verse. And realistically, it's crit equals verse equals mastery, and then followed by like everything is well above haste. So really quick, let's start with the tier set. So the tier set, unfortunately, most of the items have haste on it. The helm has haste, the shoulders have haste, the chest has haste. The only truly good item for us is going to be our gloves, which have verse and critical strike on it. And the legs, I believe, are like super heavy haste, and I don't remember the other stat. But basically, when you're starting to optimize your tier set, these are the 4 pieces you're going to want to go for. Helm, shoulders, chest, gloves, ignoring the legs. Now, before I talk about the rest of this list, let's actually talk about our tier set's effect. So our tier set is very straightforward this season. It essentially affects both Master of Harmony and Shado-pan, even though I do think it affects Shado-pan a little bit more. So what it does is our Keg Smash and Breath of Fire has just a flat 10% damage increase on it. So that's good. It's just a damage increase on our two main abilities. The 4 set, Keg Smash's energy cost is reduced by 5, and when it strikes a target afflicted by your Breath of Fire, it deals additional fire damage. So what does this look like in combat? Now, obviously the 2 set is very straightforward, it just does more damage, but if we come into a training dummy and we apply Keg and then Breath, unfortunately debuffs don't show, and then I Keg again, the damage we're going to see from this, if I can get this to actually show on details, is it's going to be called Fiery Kick, or Extra Kick, sorry. So this Extra Kick is the damage we're going to be seeing. Now, it's a very, very minor damage increase. So I don't think the 4 set is really all that impactful, in my opinion. It's still good damage. It's fine utilizing, but it's not crazy. Now, also, I'm going to get to this in a little bit, but our Apex talent also makes Keg Smash free whenever we do get a reset on it. So the 2 set, or the 4 set, I should say, doesn't feel all that impactful, but it's a slight energy reduction and it's free damage. And so you're obviously going to want to wear your 4 set. So let's come back over to our gear list and take a look at the rest of the things. So like I said, with crit versus mastery in mind, we're able to kind of identify items that have those stats on it. So our legs are going to be from Seat of the Triumvirate. These are going to be verse mastery legs. Now, there is an option to also craft. And if you raid, I believe there's maybe a raid piece that has like decent stats on it. But essentially Mythic Plus. Also, talking about this list, this is like I said previously, this is more Mythic Plus focus, assuming I'm trying to minimize the amount of raiding players have to do. There are better items from the raid, but I just don't like to include that because I think the majority of people who watch my videos actually don't raid. Anyways, moving down, our necklace is actually going to be the item that we're going to want to embellish. Now, there are a few decent embellished items this season, both for offense and defense. Now, getting this amulet crafted, you get to choose your stats, and the embellishment is a choice that just does magic damage on proc, and that's going to be your first item. Now, I also recommend you can actually change this for your bracers are going to be the Silver Moon Agent's Deflectors, which will also be embellished, which also just has a damage proc on it and increases your highest secondary stat. So another recommended piece. Now there is a ring that gives you a bunch of defensive stats. There's also an embellish item that gives you an absorb. And so there's a couple of options, but this is like what I would say is like a standard go-to and what most guys will probably end up recommending unless they get tuned for any reason. Moving on, we have a crit versus cloak from Pit of Sauron. Boots, we have Skyreach, which are crit mastery. Belt, we also have a crit mastery from Windrunner. Our rings, on the other hand, now in Mythic Plus, I recommend Seat and Algothar Academy. There is a ring from the raid that gives really high crit, and I believe like low verse, but again, that's only if you raid. But that ring is also available, or if you get unlucky, or you want like a 2 crit verse rings, you can always craft a ring later down the road. So I'm going to pull up on screen now just a quick breakdown. Again, it's also available in my Discord. This is the order I recommend crafting in once the season begins. It's going to start off with your embellished items. I'd also recommend getting a polearm or some type of weapon if you haven't gotten mythic weapons at the point where you have like your 4th craft, basically your 4th spark. And then you can craft kind of whatever. So if you want to target any piece that you haven't gotten lucky on or gotten from your vault on the mythic track, it's going to be a sizable increase. So coming back, we then have trinkets. Now, trinkets, similar to how I've been treating the rest of the best in slot gear, it depends on if you raid or not. Your best trinkets are going to naturally come from the raid. This is always the case every season, and this is why a lot of high-end mythic players tend to try to raid if they can, especially in a mythic guild, because the trinkets just tend to have a lot more value to them. And so personally, I'm going to recommend 1 dungeon trinket and 1 raid trinket if you can get your hands on it. But again, the trinkets this season tend to be a little underwhelming in my opinion. And I will do a separate, probably trinket video at some point in the very near future because they just changed them on beta. So I can actually look at all the updated stats because they did like a massive, basically like a 70% buff to almost every single trinket outside of a few. So I'll do that and I'll cover that in a bit. But I recommend Skyreach for your Solar Flare Prism. This is a main stat stick and it gives you crit procs. Crit's a very good stat for Brewmaster. The second trinket I recommend is Gloom Spatter Dread Scale from the Void Spire. This is a crit stat stick that gives you a sizable absorb shield that absorbs 50% of incoming damage, and it does a burst of AoE. It's almost a copy and paste from the other side trinket, the Blood Splattered Scale. And so basically identical. Now, there is an alternative, and the alternative is actually going to be the Solar Core Igniter, which also comes from Skyreach. This is going to give you a very similar absorb shield to Gloom Splatter Dread Scale, except the absorb is actually about 20-ish, 30% bigger, but it doesn't do damage. And so I recommend this from a defensive point of view, but if you're looking for damage, there's also some great trinkets as well. And so I'll pull up a trinket slide on page. There's a bunch of raid trinkets that are really good. There's some honorable mentions as well. Again, these are located in my Discord, and I'm going to be doing a trinket video breaking all of these trinkets down in the very near future. Last but not least, let's just quickly talk about weapons. So this season, there are no cantrip effect items like we've seen from Arakara or back in Nurabar Palace, or even the golden knuckles from Liberation of Undermine. These things just don't really exist. There is one from Delves, but it caps out at heroic item level, so probably not in your best interest to utilize that. Now, the Sims will tend to favor polearms, but again, agility is our priority here, our main stat. And so you're going to ultimately use whatever your highest item level weapon is. When it comes to polearms, I recommend the Obsidian Goaltending Spire from Algothar Academy. This has critical strike and versatility. Alternatively, there's also a Dread Flail Bludgeon from Nexus Point Zenith. Now, this is a one-headed weapon, so you will have to farm 2 of these. But if you get your hands on 2 of those before you get an Obsidian Goaltending Spire, whichever one works. These are both fine. There's pros and cons to dual wielding versus, single target wielding. I will try to remember to post a video on screen. Most of the information in that video is still relevant, but there's a lot of, factors. Having 2 enchants is really good, except you also have the chance to get parried or your attacks can miss when you dual wield versus a polearm. There's also RNG high rolling now with Shado-pan. And obviously, I already mentioned, cantrip effects, etc. So anyways, this is the BIS list that I recommend for players who are more focused on Mythic Plus. If you happen to raid, there's good items out there as well. Again, Sinzhu's link on WoWhead, I think, is a similar and also more raid inclusive kind of best in slot list. All right, so now that we have gear out of the way, let's move on to talents. So again, huge kind of disclaimer here. There are speculations that the class is going to get nerfed due to how strong the class performed on beta. Blizzard has announced that tuning will probably come on March 17th, and then further tuning will come in future weeks. So and I think most players are probably expecting a pretty heavy-handed nerf to brew single target damage, so things can change, but I want to walk through what is currently being considered like the top raid builds, and I'm going to talk about my experience doing Mythic Plus builds because I tend to have different suggestions based on your experience level, based on your group that you're playing with, etc. So let's kind of take a deep dive here into talents. So when it comes to raiding, this is what our advanced build is going to end up looking like. Now, there's a couple things I want to note about this build. This is for brewmasters who are generally more comfortable. You're sacrificing some defensive options for offensive options. And so things like special delivery versus running just elixir of determination. You're also going to be changing your rotation because of fluidity of motion. You're going to be prioritizing blackout kick much more often. You aren't running any purification or purifying brew cooldown reduction talents like anvil and stave or high tolerance because obviously you're not going to be dodging that often. And you're not necessarily trying to fish for your apex because most of your damage is going to be coming from things like blackout kick, charred passions, and specifically things like facepalm, counterstrike, and your blackout combo in conjunction with meditative focus. So this build that you're going to see on screen, I will also have linked in my Discord, is primarily focused on Big Dam. Now, the class talents don't really matter. This isn't probably the most accurate tree. I think the suggestion mostly is to go for something like Jade Walk and probably something like Bounding Agility, for example, because you most likely don't need a detox or, soothe, or even you're probably going to be in range of enemies the whole fight. So none of these things really matter. With the bloat in talent points this season and in this expansion to our class tree, a lot of this stuff is kind of subjective. Like if you want, I don't like recommending Bounding Agility because it's just like, because roll now goes further, like I'm not used to it. So sometimes it actually makes me go a little bit further than I'd like to. So if you don't like something like that, like me, you can just slot this into Silent Sanctuary or Detox or whatever, and it really won't hurt you. So what we're really focusing on here is the spec tree. Now, when it comes to something like you want to play a little bit more defensive going into raid, you would drop things like Fuel on the Fire, for example, and you would go for Awakening Spirit. You can drop something like Walk with the Ox and you go into Nizau's Resolve to have like more uptime. You could also drop Special Delivery for Elixir of Determination if you need it. Now, depending on the level of content, you might never proc Elixir. So this is based on your own experience. Like, let's say you pull a boss and you just get obliterated. Maybe putting on Elixir could be a good idea. Also, running shadowboxing treads just so you have a more consistent rotation is also fine. And then running things like Bob and Weave. So these are the types of changes I would make if you're newer to Brewmaster or you're not super comfortable with like the damage profile of the fight. You can start with something like this, and as you get more comfortable, start leaning into more offensive talents like Walk with the Ox and Fuel on the Fire and Special Delivery. So with that being said, let's now talk about what I would consider a kind of like basic Shado-pan build for Mythic Plus. So we're going to swap over to this, and this is what I recommend for players who are relatively new to Brewmaster. You aren't playing necessarily the most offensive. This is for players who are pugging with a healer. You're just in pugs. You're maybe not super comfortable with the kit and the damage taken profile you're going to be receiving in Mythic Plus. So that's what this build is for. You're going to see things like Elixir of Determination being ran. You're going to only see one Walk with the Ox, for example. You're going to see a combination of High Tolerance and Anvil and Stave. This will make you tankier both in single target and in like larger AoE pulls because you're going to be able to purify more. You're not necessarily prioritizing things like Counter Strike or Fuel on the Fire for that extra big damage, or things like Special Delivery, very similar to the raid build. So if you want to start getting more aggressive with this playstyle, you can start shifting from Elixir into things like Special Delivery, improve Blackout Kick into Swift as a Coursing River. You would maybe drop Anvil and Stave for something like Walk with the Ox. You might drop something like High Tolerance for Fuel on the Fire, or for more single target damage, Counter Strike. So these are the kind of decisions you would start making in high Mythic Plus when you're starting to look at getting more single target damage, looking at if you're playing with a coordinated group and you can like start leaning on your healer a little bit more to keep you alive so you can do more damage. So again, this is going to be linked in my Discord, which will be linked down below in the talent channel. Next, the big hype is actually going to be Master of Harmony. Now, this is the build that I was playing with on beta, and I was getting significant damage. And this is what I think a lot of players were playing. There is some debate in exactly how you want to go about changing some of these talents around to get a little bit more tankiness. So for example, if you want more Purifying Brews in large AoE, but you don't really care about it in single target, you can swap for a stack of Anvil and Stave. High Tolerance isn't bad either. If you want big AoE, you would go Fuel on the Fire or Special Delivery, and you can also drop Elixir for Fuel on the Fire as well. And so kind of similar drops and talking points when discussing how to get more damage. But if we go back to this build, the idea is that you're going to be focusing most of your damage not into your Apex, not into Keg Smashes and Breath of Fires, but instead you're going to be really focusing on really massive Tiger Palms, which then cleave with something like Overwhelming Force. So what we're seeing is a 100% modifier on Tiger Palm, which is multiplicative, with something like Blackout Combo, which is a 200% damage increase, on top of something like Counter Strike, which is another 100%. So you're having this multiplicative equation that's amping Tiger Palm to do massive damage, which also cleaves. And so the whole premise is that you're just basically slamming Celestial Infusion on cooldown, and you're trying to like optimize these buffs to just do big single target damage. This build doesn't do as much AoE as Shado-pan. Shado-pan's like extremely bursty inside of their Black Ox window in big, large AoE pulls. But Master of Harmony, while it doesn't do massive AoE, it still does competitive AoE, especially in like your 8 target count, 5 to 8 target count, and its single target damage is like 40% higher than Shado-pan. So this is a really fun build for Mythic Plus, obviously contingent on future nerfs like Blizzard has stated. Last but not least, I do want to just kind of do like an honorable mention for the build that was being run in the highest keys at the very end of beta. And so a couple things you'll notice is now you have access to something like Chi Burst, which is good kind of like burst AoE, on top of also having things like Nizao. You're also seeing a shift to something like Switch as a Coursing River. This is essentially to try to get more Flurry Strike stacks throughout combats. You're going to see a drop in Elixir you're just not leaning on this as a defensive. You're also playing double High Tolerance to give you more resets in single target encounters, because that's really where you're lacking. And you're also still playing that kind of priority damage with Blackout Combo, Counter Strike, and Facepalm. So still relatively high single target and a lot more control over Flurry Strikes, and even running things like Black Ox Brew, which is a min-max way to refresh Purifying Brew, reset your Celestial Infusion, and reset your energy if you're ever out of energy in a single target encounter. So this is an advanced build. I don't recommend the average player play with this. This is for people who are really trying to min-max their damage. This is probably what title players will run, obviously, again, depending on buffs and nerfs in the future. So yeah, those are all the talents I would recommend running. Again, all of these builds I just went over are going to be located in my Discord. So transitioning slightly, I do want to talk about the strength of Bring Me Another and why this Apex talent is probably one of the best tank Apex talents out there, on par with something like maybe Guardian Druid or Vengeance Demon Hunter. So the way that Bring Me Another works is that it's extremely gambly. is the best way I can describe it. You're going to basically be spamming your brews. And what it's done is it's shifted the way that Brewmaster plays. Instead of having a very complicated but also static rotation, you're now just like doing this Prot Warrior style react. So if you get a proc of your Apex talent on the 20% chance reset to get the reset on Keg Smash, you're fishing for those because Keg Smash just does so much damage. So while I'm talking about this, I do want to actually jump into an Algothar Academy just to kind of show you what's going on. Now, I hope it's still open this late in beta. I'd imagine it is, but beta is kind of dead right now. So essentially with the Apex talents is that you have a 20% chance on drinking any brew. So that includes Purifying, Celestial Infusion or Celestial Brew, Fortifying Brew, and Black Ox Brew. So any of these brews have a 20% chance to reset. Now, when you start putting more ranks, and I'm assuming you're going to be max level when you're watching this video, or at least you're planning on playing Shado-pan or Brewmaster at a max level, your next 2 ranks will eventually get your Empty the Barrel reset on your Keg Smash to basically be free and get reset and it increases your physical damage done by 20%. And so Keg Smash becomes this like nuke of an ability. It just does so much damage. It has a lot of interaction with your class. And so what you're doing for is you're constantly fishing for these resets. So you're basically going Keg Breath because of Sal Salabim strength. And then during this, you're purifying at the same time, basically immediately after hitting Keg Smash to fish to get the reset. So then you can go Keg Breath, Keg Breath, Keg Breath. And then you have controlled resets with your final rank, your rank 4, which is also considered rank 3 in the tooltip. When you cast Fortifying Brew or Celestial Infusion / Brew, you automatically gain an Empty the Barrel proc, and you're applying healing to your group and yourself. And so the hot is really, really potent. It's like 20% of your max health over like 8 seconds or whatever like that. It might be a little bit more. And then it's just doing, empty barrels are just doing increased damage. So the whole gameplay loop, especially when you're playing Shado-pan, is you're just going Keg Breath, Keg Breath, Keg Breath, Keg Breath. And you want to basically do that in AoE forever. Now, in single target, it's a little bit different. You're going to go like Keg Breath, Blackout, Tiger Palm, because you're still trying to get big single target damage, but you're trying to prioritize those resets. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to walk through what I'm doing as I do one of these pulls. So I'm just going to grab 1 pack of lashers because, you know, that's fine. And let's get into this. So here we go. Once I get everything gathered, we're going to go Keg Breath, and then I'll summon my Ox, and then we're just going Keg Breath. I'm going to Purify, and then I'm going to Celestial Infusion. It resets Keg Breath. I should be getting Keg back shortly. I don't know why my CDs aren't showing up. Keg Breath, Exploding Keg to reset, Keg Breath, and then I'm going to Fortifying Brew. Keg Breath, Keg, I'm Purifying, Keg Breath, and then we're just kind of like waiting. And so every once in a while, you might run out of kegs if based on like how often you're able to purify. Also, I don't know why this isn't updated. It should be showing. But basically, your whole goal is that you just want to be able to Keg Breath as often as possible. So Keg Breath, Purify, Black Ox Brew, Celestial Infusion, Keg Breath, Keg, Purify, Breath. And like that's it. Like you're just trying to do this the whole time. And then what ends up happening, and I guess maybe I can try to drop combat here. This wasn't like the most accurate gameplay. I'm going to be totally honest. Plus some of my CDs aren't showing, and normally I use the timers to try to indicate like, oh, hey, I should probably do something here. But you can see that like Flurry Strikes, Keg, and Breath is like just doing all of my damage here. And so that's kind of the goal in these larger pulls. So the Apex talent is really strong. As you can see here too, Refreshing Drink is also doing like 10% of my overall healing. Generally in Mythic Plus, it's going to be doing more because you're going to be healing your allies as well. And so what this Apex talent does essentially is it makes energy not really a resource. It's giving you more cooldown reduction on things like Celestial Infusion and Celestial Brew and Purifying Brew and Fortifying Brew because you're getting these resets. And it's also providing group healing. So it's just a really, really strong Apex talent just altogether. So that's kind of how that works. I hope I explained that well. Probably wasn't the best example or showcase of this, but I will be covering it way more in depth in my masterclass series in the next week or two. So speaking of Apex talents and kind of going off of that same vein, I kind of want to talk about what the general rotation is going to end up looking like. So let me head back to Stormwind to a training dummy and I'll talk about it. So here we are. This is like the very standard rotation. So this is what brews do, not considering hero talents or anything. So your rotation is generally going to be Keg, and then you're going to Breath, and then you're going to Blackout Kick, and then you're going to Tiger Palm. That is the most standard rotation. So the reason why is you want to apply Keg, which allows Breath of Fire to be applied, which will then make the mob take damage over time. As you can see here, it's going to just be burning. So it's a nice little sustained amount of damage. You're also going to be healing slightly from it due to Vital Flame. And then it also, with your tier set, is going to make your Keg Smash also do a little extra damage because of your 4 set. So Keg Breath and then Blackout Kick amps your Tiger Palm, which is doing more damage based on facepalm, blackout combo, and also counterstrike if you're playing it and you happen to proc it. So again, keg, breath, blackout kick, tiger palm. Keg with Salsalabim Strength, which is a talent you should be running in almost every single build, will reset the cooldown of your Breath of Fire. So don't pay attention to 15 second. It's always just it's whatever your keg smash is. So keg, breath, blackout, tiger. Now, like I've talked about with the Bring Me Another talent, we now have control on when our keg smash actually resets. So now when we kind of get into the rotation or deeper, it's going to be keg, breath, blackout, tiger. We're going to keg once again, breath, blackout, fire. And then once we do this keg, we're now out of keg for a few seconds. So now we can Celestial Infusion, which will reset and make this free. So you can go keg, breath, blackout, tiger. So your Celestial Infusion can be used in one of two ways. You can use it to reset, or you can use it as like a pseudo defensive or your active mitigation. Generally speaking, it's going to kind of all have like a nice ebb and flow anyways during combat. So just a few kind of notes about Shado-pan. Shado-pan really wants to prioritize physical damage elements or types because of how their talent tree is set up. And so when you're playing this, you're generally going to prioritize keg smash resets at all times. So while you start purifying and casting Celestial Infusion, you're going to end up just prioritizing keg smash in a lot of different cases. So keg, breath, blackout, kick, tiger, and then you're going to keg. But then if you explode and keg again, you're going to just want to send another keg smash. You cast Fortifying Brew, you can just send another keg smash. This keg smash ends up doing like the majority of your single target damage, especially in raid, so that's always going to be a priority. Now, when you're taking damage and you're purifying, it's going to be, like I said before, keg, breath, as like often as you can, and you'll fill with like a blackout kick every once in a while, but you can pretty much ignore Tiger Palm in AoE because you're going to be trying to get more cooldown reduction by using keg smash. Now, if we swap over to something like Master of Harmony, your priority is going to be a little bit different. You're going to start ignoring your Apex talent a little bit more. And this is mostly due to something like Meditative Focus, which is just making your Tiger Palm so much more important to hit. So it's still good to get Keg Smash active, followed by Breath of Fire, and then you're going to blackout kick Tiger Palm almost every single time. And you do want to be aware of where you're facing, because you do shoot out a frontal, which cleaves. And so like if you're in combat like this, and you're pulling these mobs, like you don't want to face this way because now you're not hitting the target to your left or right. You want to then, face this way, so your AoE is hitting both targets. But even when you do get resets playing Master of Harmony, the priority is still, if you have Counter-Strike and you have Blackout combo, you're still going to be sending Tiger Palm. But now the rotation is really, really, really straightforward. So Brewmaster has become really easy to play. Now there are a lot of like little conditionals still that I'm going to talk about in my Masterclass series going forward, but I hope this gave you kind of a basic idea of the rotation and the priority in the two different hero talents, and based off if you're in single target or AoE. I do want to have like a quick little FAQ section because there are two questions or two kind of comments I've been seeing a lot of lately, and I want to address in this video just in case you have the same question. So first things first is, when should you purify? This is a very, very common question because stagger is kind of a confusing way to mitigate damage. Instead of just raising your shield or keeping up demon spikes or hitting Shield of the Righteous, you're taking damage up front, but you're maximizing it by maintaining shuffle, which is a passive. And then your Purifying Brew will light up sometimes. Your stagger has different levels. So is it like, do I purify in green stagger, red stagger, yellow stagger? Is there a certain amount of red stagger I need to have before I purify? My basic answer is that you should never sit on 2 charges of Purifying Brew, but it is okay to sit on 1 or to spam it. Ultimately, I don't think most players should worry about their Purifying Brew stacks, because ultimately what's going to end up happening is you just want to proc Bring Me Another as much as possible. So Purifying Brew now also has an offensive benefit to it. So when's the best time to purify? Give or take every 6 to 8 seconds. Now you're going to be getting cooldown reduction consistently through your Apex, through your Keg Smash, through additional sources, and it's just good to hit often. Every time you hit Purifying Brew, you're potentially reducing the cooldown of all of your other abilities in the future. So first condition, you're going to purify every, between 6 to 10 seconds, I would say, is like a fine window. You can hit it when it glows. That's generally indicating you have elevated stagger. And finally, just hit it on cooldown. I don't know. Those are like the 3 different recommendations. It kind of depends on the content you're doing, but never sit on both charges in combat. The last kind of note, I guess, with Purifying Brew as well is, if you're at full health, like let's say you're sitting at like between 80 to 100% health, I would consider you healthy. And because of things like Gaiplin's Imperial Brew, there's no reason to cast Purifying Brew because it might be wasted. Wait till you're low, and then all of a sudden your Purifying Brew becomes like a little lay on hands. But again, this is kind of a weird conditional for higher players who kind of understand their damage hit profile and cooldowns and the cooldown reduction you're, getting through the class. Now, the second question I see, I've kind of covered this already, is should I dual wield or use a polearm? Now, I answered this earlier in the gear section, just in case you missed it or if you skipped to this at the end for some reason because you just wanted to hear like these more nuanced takes. Basically, they're relatively equal. Use your highest item level weapon that you have possible. Ideal stats would be nice. There's no cantrip effects, so nothing important there. Dual wielding can have a higher output when playing Shado-pan based on RNG, but I wouldn't rely on this kind of thing. Essentially, polearm or dual wield, it doesn't really matter. Finally, there is one thing I've been seeing pop up lately because Master of Harmony is potentially coming back as a preferred hero talent, especially in like single target. And it all revolves around Balanced Stratagem. Now, this is an ability or a passive, I should say, that when you cast a physical spell, it amps your next nature/fire spell and vice versa. So when you cast a fire or nature spell, it amps your next physical spell. Now, this isn't really anything I would recommend people care about unless you're really trying to min-max your damage. So if we come into combat here and I hit Blackout Kick, you're going to see that it was a physical spell, so it gave me an amp on my next fire or nature spell. And so now if I hit Tiger Palm, same thing. Now it's at 2 stacks, so 10% more damage. I can Blackout Kick, then Tiger Palm again. It's now at 4. I can Keg Smash, so it's at 5. And now my next Chi Burst or Breath of Fire is now going to deal 25% more damage. Now, this is good, but you're going to be hitting Breath of Fire more often than it's worth screwing up your rotation to try to get this up an extra 10% damage. So I don't recommend necessarily trying to get it to 5 stacks every time. Also, we just don't have enough nature damage abilities in our kits to amp a physical spell to be strong enough. So I've seen some people talk about potentially going like Breath of Fire into a Chi Burst into like Vivify spamming to try to amp this for a Tiger Palm. Trust me, it's not worth it. I would recommend treating this like a normal spell. The only thing I would suggest if you're truly trying to get a little bit more damage out of something like Tiger Palm is you're going to change the order of how you hit your abilities. Now, this was brought up on stream the other day. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. So if you're the person who commented this, thank you for fucking with me. For pure optimization, your rotation might get a little butchered if you do it like this, and eventually you might skew it in one way or the other. So ultimately, it's going to kind of all work itself out in the end. But basically, what I'm trying to get to is that you're going to go Keg Smash into Blackout Kick, then into Breath. And then this is going to amp your Tiger Palm, giving it a 5% increase, which will also affect Overwhelming Force, Face Palm, Counter Strike, etc. And so you're amping your biggest amp. And then again, it kind of fits back in. So Keg, Blackout, Breath, Tiger. Keg, Blackout, Breath, Tiger. Now, eventually you're going to get to the point where you can't do this. So it would be right now. And so this is when you would Celestial Infusion. But now it's like, okay, do I Blackout Kick because it came up first? Or do I Keg to get Breath back for Tiger Palm? And so I recommend mostly sticking to your Keg Breath instead of going Keg Blackout. But there is a way to kind of get a little bit more burst damage from Tiger Palm in certain situations. So I've seen that come up a lot. Basically, long story short, Balanced Stratagem is not worth optimizing, in my opinion. It's all going to work itself out in the end, whether you're getting a nice amp for things like Exploding Keg or a Chi Burst or a Breath of Fire. It ultimately doesn't matter because you just don't have enough nature spells to balance out your physical spells. Anyways, I think that just about wraps it up. I know this was a crazy long video. It was structured, but it was like very loosely structured. I just had bullet points that I wanted to talk about. Now, I am going to be doing a masterclass series where I'm going to go in depth. It's going to be structured and scripted, where I talk about the rotation, how to use defensives, breaking down stagger, all of that stuff. I'm going to also be getting into specific like hero talents and how to optimize it in both kind of environments, whether it's raid or Mythic Plus, and talk about basically everything. So I hope that covers it. Again, I didn't expect Blizzard to rework Brew after recently reworking Brew. So I'm excited to dive into that. Like I said before, that's going to be available early on my Patreon for supporters over there. And it's going to be available probably early for Patreon, or sorry, not Patreon. It's also going to be early for things like channel members. So if you're a YouTube channel member or interested in that, you'll have access to that, early. Ultimately, though, they'll all be available, so no qualms. And then finally, I do want to shout out my UI, my central unit HUD. I do have obviously some things to fix here, but that is also available to all supporters, whether it's Twitch, Patreon, or channel members, as of right now in my Discord. So anyways, Sorry for the long rant. I hope I answered some of your questions in this video. Again, like I said, check out WoWhead. Sinzhu put a pretty comprehensive guide together like he always does, and that is a good resource. But I'd also recommend checking out other creators, Icy Veins, Blood and Mallet, Murloc.io, whatever you need to kind of figure out the information that you're trying to gather for yourself. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.